Wake up, everyone. It's time for a call to action. Welcome to Call to Action today, where there are no sacred cows, with your host, Steve Noble, just an ordinary man who believes in an extraordinary God, and he's calling you out every week to live the Christian life in your home, your work, and even in politics. Call Steve now at 866-34-TRUTH. Or check him out online at c2atoday.org. And now, with some much-needed cough medicine for the church, here's your host, Steve Noble.
Well, if you take the time to study, you'll find out that Jesus talked about a lot of different things. And one of the things that he talked about quite a bit, actually, I think most people are surprised by this, is money and possessions. And why would he do that? Well, I think that the Lord has always known what we would struggle with, and that's certainly an issue that we do struggle with as individuals, as families, and business, is dealing with financial pressure and financial issues and the love of money and the love of stuff and fear of it, and whether you have a lot or just kind of a mediocre, a medium amount, or very little, it's something that we all, I think, push comes to shove, we would all admit that we struggle with money and our possessions on a fairly regular. But Jesus talked about it a lot. 16 of the 38 parables were concerned with how to handle money and possessions, and the Gospels, an amazing 1 out of 10 verses, 288 in all, deal directly with the subject of money. The Bible offers 500 verses on prayer. That's awesome. Less than 500 verses on faith, but more than 2,000 verses on money and possessions. So if Jesus talked about it, that's why we talk about it on a fairly regular basis here on Call to Action Radio. Today, no different, as we re-engage here with our good friend David Fischer from Landmark Capital, and a Money Monday on a Tuesday in a month when we're only doing a couple of Monday Mondays because of my sabbatical. So, David, thank you so much for your patience and your understanding and your partnership. How are you?
I'm doing great. Great to have you back, but more importantly, great that you took a sabbatical.
Oh, man, yeah. And we were talking about this a little bit off the air before the show started. It made me realize that I don't do rest well. I don't think about it much. You know, we go, hey, well, I take a trip with the kids or whatever. And that's not really very restful. If you're a parent and you have children, you know that's not exactly what we're talking about. So we have to be careful with that. And it was a huge blessing, but you've been kind to kind of allow me to do that and walk away from radio for a couple weeks. But it's great to be re-engaged and be back with you. I know we have a lot to talk about today as we do kind of a full show on a Money Monday and a lot going on out there. Let's just go right to the kind of one of the big issues that's out there today. And I don't know if we're thinking about it in these terms, but certainly we've seen the rhetoric between our country and North Korea gets very disturbing. I mean, the talks of missiles and intercontinental ballistic missiles and the things that Donald Trump says and General Mattis, and then what Kim Jong-Un says, that crazy little whack job over there in North Korea. So is this an issue that's going to affect the market? Has it affected the market? And how do we pay attention to this from a less discussed perspective, which is the financial side of it?
Well, it did affect a lot of things. It affected the psyche of everybody. It did affect, and when that gets affected, it affects the markets. And so the stocks pulled back several hundreds of points last Thursday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and a little bit Monday. They haven't fully yet recovered yet from that, the Dow I'm referring to. Gold shot up quite a bit, $35, a little bit greater than that. Still up from where it was before, but the thing called the VIX, which is the volatility index on the Chicago Board of Trade, went up 70%.
Wow.
In just 2 days, which tells us what's going to happen in the next 30 days if there's uncertainty. So there's still a little bit of uncertainty. I think the biggest portion is all done because of the recent comments by Kim Jong-Un that he's just going to watch what we do. And good for him. I don't like war, but sometimes you got to stand your ground.
Yeah, and there's that this is not an issue that is new to us in America. It's not an issue that's new on the political scene, on the international scene. This has been going on for a few decades now. But it is interesting to watch, and that the markets usually react to these kinds of massive worldwide events. But do we just kind of notice that out of interest, David, or do we have to pay attention to that as investors?
Well, we notice it kind of out of interest, but this thing is not fixed. We have two very strong type A people that can cause a war, President Trump and Kim Jong-Un, and both of them have their very strong beliefs in what they were going to do. And I don't think President Trump's going to back down, and I don't see Kim Jong-Un. So it's not going away. Recent polls, 62% of Americans are very scared about the potential of war. And that was last week's poll. So we might have some more bumps. I don't think this is going to stop just last week. The markets are going to be bumpy for a while.
And for you as a specialist in precious metals, and we've got some being delivered soon for ourselves, to the Noble family. I'm excited about that. But is that something that, hey, listen, this is the reality that we live in. We live in a very topsy-turvy world, and investments can get rocked by stuff like this. But often we talk about kind of having a balanced approach to investing. Isn't that really where the kind of precious metals kind of shines in terms of its place in a portfolio, that it gives you that balance, it gives you that counterbalance to kind of the craziness and the uncertainty in the world?
Absolutely. You know, we were in a war before, the Gulf War, and gold almost quadrupled during a 6-7 year time. Stocks went up about 40%. Going to war will probably be very good for the economy. Not.
But I'm going to pick you up during the commercial break, which we're only about a minute away from. You're kind of going in and out. So I'm going to sit this quick. Hang in there, David. I'll call you back. And I want to make sure we have good quality sound there today with David, because we've got a lot of things we're going to talk about as we move through the rest of the show. And we talked about Donald Trump, and we're going to kind of get back to that, because we got to look at what's the effect of a lot of Donald Trump's campaign promises and things that are on his agenda haven't happened. You know, healthcare was a big flop. We don't know what's going to happen with the tax reform in terms of individual tax and corporate tax. Those are big issues. So a lot of things there that we need to look at in terms of how they're going to affect the not just the economy in general, but the stock market and investments throughout the rest of the year, especially. That's kind of the near term that we're considering. We're also going to talk about, hey, what if you had invested a decent amount of money in January, like back right around the first of the year, and let's say you put $10,000 into the market, whether you invested in the market itself, so you look at the Dow Jones or the NASDAQ, or you look at precious metals. And that's why we have David on. We kind of look at everything. We look at banking. We look at international issues, domestic issues. And then because it's his specialty, we look at the place of precious metals. You hear all kinds of stuff about gold and silver. That always made me nervous. It always sounded kind of wacky to me. But I spent time getting educated and getting to know David. He's my brother in Christ and an expert on it. And he's not crazy about it, over the top about it. He just knows it's got a sound place. Welcome back. This is Steve Noble. It's Called to Action Radio. Great to be with you. Great to be back in the saddle, as it were, and having a Monday on a Tuesday here with our good friend David Fischer from Landmark Capital. By the way, just an excellent staff, great people to work with over there, great information, and that's what David comes on here for, is information and education. So if you would like some more of that, which you should, we should never stop learning, especially when it comes to being good stewards of the finances that the Lord has placed into our care, custody, and control. Give his folks a call over there and tell them that, you know, you heard about David and you heard him on Call to Action Radio. That would be awesome. 844-879-8882 is their phone number, as always. 844-879-8882. They also have an awesome website. Well, I was just on the website just a few minutes before the show started, landmarkgold.com. Very easy to navigate, all kinds of great information. Actually, right on the homepage, if you come down the homepage just a little bit, and there's all kinds of great like little shotgun issues there that you should find out. Can the government seize your retirement funds? How to diversify your portfolio? How should I invest in precious metals? More specific things. Why is J.P. Morgan recommending gold? And is gold a scam? I mean, these are normal questions that most of us ask if we're paying attention to how we're investing, and that's why it's been such a great blessing to have David on for as long as he's been joining us here on Call to Action Radio. So again, David, thanks for being here, and now we have a better connection, so we should be ready to roll.
Absolutely. I'm here for you and your listeners to help you understand what's going on.
Thank you, buddy. Appreciate that. Well, we mentioned President Trump a little bit. Of course, he campaigned, made a lot of promises. A lot of that is not happening, and I don't place all the blame for that on Donald Trump. We have a Congress that is unwilling, unable, perhaps not even really interested in doing these things. But what do we need to see happen here? And what's the relationship between the things that Donald Trump has promised, and we had the big Trump bump, obviously, ever since he got elected last November for the first 6 months of the year, and the impact on stock market and stuff. How do we approach this? What's happening with his agenda, with his campaign promises, and the impact it has or won't have on the market?
Well, obviously, the things he campaigned upon, repeal and replace Obamacare, building a wall, tax reform, and filing your taxes on a postcard, none of those things have come to pass yet. And he thought it was going to happen in 30 days and then the 100-day mark. And we've blown by all those things. Why the market's moving is certainly not because of that, but it's because of the other things that they can't stop him from. He's a business president, right, a businessman. And so, just like today at the top of the hour, right before we went live, Steve, on your program, he's saying, I'm doing an executive order to create infrastructure, to take away a freeway. He was giving as an example that took 17 years to build. Jeez. When they're creating the same exact freeway now, it will take 2 years because he's taking away government regulation. So this is why the economy is growing, is because business people are expecting we're going to have a much better environment to do job growth. And so that's why it's all happening. That's what the market is moving on. And I think that's why we're going to be in a bull market for quite some time, with some bumps along the ways and maybe a correction that's long overdue. But this is why it's growing. If we do get a tax bill passed, all the better. But I think the Democrats and the Republicans can't agree on a lot of things, and unfortunately, that's one thing they probably won't get passed.
Yeah, well, if I'm looking at a year to date on the Dow Jones Industrial, all the way from January 1st to today, it's got that steady climb upwards, and there's always the little movement up and down, 21,998 today, below the 22,000 mark, but it has been interesting, even though some of these big issues haven't been passed, that there still seems to be kind of an upward momentum to the market. So if somebody, for example, if they had invested $10,000 at the beginning of the year in the Dow Jones and just a regular spread of stocks, or into gold or into silver, what would things look like today?
Well, silver was the least performing. It's up year-to-date. Market closed yesterday. Here's the percentages: 7.8%, or be up 10,780. Stocks, the Dow was second place, 9.9%, or $10,990, and gold led the charge at 10.5%, or it'd be up $11,050. So we're going to see a bull market in gold and stocks. I said that in January. We're clear that there, and I think we're going to have a bigger movement in gold than the Dow the latter part of this year.
How abnormal is that? It seems like if you look historically, you see most of the time the periods they're kind of inverse. In this case, they're running together in an upward motion.
Most of the time it's inverse, but when our debt is not managed properly, then we can have a bull market happening at both times. Just like from 2001 to 2011, gold almost tripled, and stocks went up about 45, 50% during that period of time. So we can have both. We're having both. Until they take care of our debt, we're going to continue to have both.
So you think this will hold true through the end of the year, that gold will, in fact, outpace stocks?
Well, for the last 37 out of 41 years, gold moves up more in the second half of the year than the first. The biggest performing months for gold are September and October. So if history is proven to be correct, and ironically, those are the worst months for stocks, October, if history proves to be correct, Steve, we're going to have a bigger movement in gold coming up than what we've already saw.
Wow, yeah. So the information on that, to find out more about that, as always, 844-879-8882 is David's staff over there at Landmark Capital. You can call him right now. It would be great, and tell him that you heard about David here on Called to Action Radio, 844-879-8882 or landmarkgold.com. So speaking of the Fed, we got to deal with several things there. I mean, we've got the interest rates, we've got their balance sheet, and then I want to talk also about the debt ceiling. We'll get to that in a minute. But what about the Fed and what they're doing about interest rates? It seems that they're kind of all over the map on that.
Well, they've raised it twice this year, once last year. They were trying to get to a normal rate, what they call normalization, and that's going to be between 3.5% to 4.5%. But when you actually average it out, it's 5.33% over a 50-year period of time, the low being 0.25 point, the high being over 20%. So that's the real number. They're depicting between the 3.5% to 4.5%. But every time they raise rates, the stock market takes a bump backward. So it's done it twice this year. Each time they raise rates, the market doesn't like higher interest rates because it means the cost of doing business is more challenging. We're also pulling back the punch bowl of unraveling their balance sheets, selling their assets that they ballooned from $500 billion, $550 billion, to $4.5 trillion. Jeez. And those involve mortgage-backed securities and treasuries. So now they're selling their balance sheet. Oh, they're saying they're going to sell their balance sheet. They actually haven't come out yet, Steve, and said this is the start date. So the market's kind of waiting for that to happen. That's not going to be good news to the market. And raising interest rates, they've kind of changed their tune, flip-flopped on that. So they're kind of might not continue to raise rates to get to normalization. So the Fed is losing some credibility, I think, in some of this.
Yeah, so what's the deal with the Fed in terms of their own pathology and what drives them? I mean, I think what most people, we start talking about the Fed, and a lot of people, I think, their eyes start to roll back in their head. And it's hard to understand because they're kind of playing, it seems like they're playing both sides of the game all the time.
Well, they're trying to see by their talks to see if the market can handle it. Because sometimes before they say something in an announcement before they act, and they're seeing the ramifications of their talk, and then they move forward or not. But 5 out of the 6 last times the Fed has unwound their balance sheet, and it's never been at this magnitude of size. But 5 out of the last 6, it's always ended in a recession. So that's the problem. They're facing a brick wall that they don't have a pathway that is certain where they cannot get away from a recession. But they're also losing credibility in the things that they're saying.
Yeah, we'll talk about that. We'll talk about the debt ceiling, several other big issues that we have to look at today. Here on a Money Monday on a Tuesday with David Fischer, Landmark Capital. This is Steve Noble on Called to Action Radio. We'll be right back at it right after this.
Let's try it all together. 1, 2, 1, 2.
Welcome back. It's Steve Noble, Called to Action Radio. Great to be with you. That's a crazy little tune by David Crowder. I'll have an opportunity this weekend out in L.A. David Crowder will be one of the artists that I get to interview this weekend out at the Harvest Crusade with Pastor Greg Laurie. I actually talked to Greg earlier today and pre-recorded an interview. I'm going to play some of that on Friday when I will be live from L.A. there in Anaheim at Angel Stadium. This will be the 28th year of the Southern California Harvest Crusade, the 27th year in a row, actually, at Angel Stadium. So my wife and I are flying out there on Thursday morning, and I'll be broadcasting live on Friday from L.A., and it's actually supposed to be beautiful weather, like 83 and breezy. They're close to the beach, so we're excited about that and getting ready to watch God move in another awesome way. Literally, we will watch thousands and thousands of people come down onto the field there and profess faith in Christ. So it's always an exciting thing to be a part of and to watch, and I'll drag you guys along with me for the ride, which will be awesome. Today, we're talking to our good friend David Fischer, Landmark Capital. LandmarkGold.com is their website. Their phone number is always 844-879-8882 for great information and education. 844-879-8882. David, we were talking about the Fed, and always such a bizarre topic to kind of deal with them. And my friend TJ on Facebook Live said with the Fed, they act as both arsonist and fireman. So how convenient is that? But it's really difficult to kind of have any credibility with the Fed these days. And you were going to mention 3 massive calls that they missed in the past, and not the least of which is one that just happened with Janet Yellen recently. So what was the deal with these 3 big oops?
Alan Greenspan in 1999, as Fed chairman, he claimed it was impossible to know if stocks were in a bubble. And where stocks were in their single largest bubble in 100-year history, the next year the market crashed.
Jeez.
Next one, Fed chairman Ben Bernanke in 2017 claimed that the subprime mortgage meltdown was contained and the effects would not spill over into the economy. The next year, the market crashed.
Yeah, so that was 2007.
And
right?
It went globally.
Jeez. Yeah, oops. Kind of missed that one. And then what Janet Yellen say recently?
Just a month ago, Janet Yellen announced that there would not be another financial crisis in her lifetime.
Now, what drives these people at the Fed to come out and make these sweeping statements like this? Because I said to you off the air when you mentioned what Janet Yellen said, I said, "Oh, well, golly, I guess I'm worshiping the wrong God here."
Well, Ben Bernanke warned of 2008 happening. Alan Greenspan, when he was not the federal chairman at the time, he had resigned, when Bernanke was in office, he called the big downturn in 2008, but he could speak freely. Just a week ago, 2 weeks ago, he's calling for a big bubble now in the markets. So they can speak freely when they get out.
Right.
They have a certain arsonist fireman approach, like your friend says. They want to make sure, imagine the Fed coming out today and say, get out of stocks, it's going to blow up,
Right, yeah.
So they have to, calm the markets and say everything's okay. But the reality is they're not telling the factual truth because history has proven otherwise.
Yeah, and that's government intrusion on the free market system in the first place. That's once we started monkeying around with the economy, this is what we got ourselves into.
The Fed does manipulate and influence the market. So does the government. And, that's why people are waking up and diversifying, and people are saying, it's not all what it is, what we're being told. Otherwise, we wouldn't have these market corrections or have these banks that are in trouble or have what we saw previously. It would have all been just a heavenly bed of roses.
Oh, yeah. So as a market specialist, anytime we hear a statement from the Fed, how do you react to that? I mean, how do you take that as a market specialist? So the Fed says, David Fischer says what?
See what the truth, there's some truth in it, but then there's also, look deeper. There's a hidden agenda trying to influence the markets and, think for yourself. It's probably opposite of what they're saying.
Yeah. And everybody's always selling something. And so you got to remember that when, that's to say, hey, if I'm going to have somebody on and they're going to talk about their business or whatever, or talk about some ministry, one of my first questions for them is, okay, do you have somebody that's like an end user, somebody that's been a recipient of the ministry? Because we always know somebody inside a ministry, inside any organization is going to kind of put their best foot forward. We all know that. We do that ourselves. And so it's often really important to go, okay, let's get somebody else here talking about it. But with the Fed, that's not possible. That's why we have to do our homework and why we have to listen to these things and pay attention like we do when David Fischer's on with us on basically every Monday. That we just delayed it a day because I just got back on the air yesterday. But we've talked a lot really throughout the year, David, where it seemed like almost every week there's another big time respectable hedge fund manager or a CEO coming out and kind of having some dire predictions about this coming impending market crash and some market doom and gloom out there. Anything lately on that front?
Well, there's been a whole bunch. Let's do a big recap on it. Morgan Stanley said recently the market is so distorted, the Fed is being forced into a pain trade. Barclays said that the debt is precarious and will result in a crisis that will reverberate around the world. Even the FDIC said there's 8,000 banks worth $13 trillion in assets that are not ready for the next crisis. Seth Klarman, who's a hedge fund manager, 30 years, probably the best track record, he says that a market sell-off could propel a market crash that will snowball into running this market downhill. Bank of England says that there's a bigger systemic risk currently now than in 2008. A couple household names. Paul Singer says, get ready for the hell trade. That all hell will break loose is what he's referring to. These are stock guys saying this thing. Ray Diallo, fund manager, 30th richest person in America, said, when the next turn comes, it's going to be really bad. And Jim Rogers, 74-year-old investment guru, he's the guy that wears the colorful blue bow ties. He says, get ready for the worst, biggest downturn in my lifetime. He's 74 years old. He says it's going to be serious stuff, and it's going to happen in the next couple years.
Wow. So I would imagine that when these guys are talking, different leaders out there, that they have a lot more credibility with somebody like you, David, than the Fed does.
Yeah, people can look at me as, oh, that guy just, hawking gold. That guy's, only wants you to put your money into gold. No, I want you to diversify because these people who have nothing to do with gold are saying, in fact, one of them, now a couple of them are actually, Ray Diallo last week said, make sure you have some money in gold. So now they're actually coming out, and they're not gold people. They're saying, get some money into gold, get diversified, a promise coming, and it could be horrendous because we haven't fixed it since 2008. So diversify.
Yeah, and it really is that simple. This is like, hey, I would never consider that particular part of the stock market. Well, that's just foolish talk. You need to be willing to look at all the different instruments that are out there, and especially because of the kind of the calming effect of gold can have, precious metals can have in a portfolio. And I didn't know any of that 2 years ago, David, when we first started talking, and then I've been educated ever since. And the nervousness and the concern I used to have about, precious metals and, Glenn Beck and gold line, blah, 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 that's all gone away. I understand it now. So it's not something that I fear. It's something that I understand, and it's a great tool that can be used, which is why we're starting to use it in our own portfolio. So I really do appreciate all the help that you've been bringing us all this time. We're talking to David Fischer, Landmark Capital. 844-879-8882 is their number, or the website is always landmarkgold.com. Let's talk about a big issue, the debt ceiling. Is this a bigger crisis now than it usually is?
Well, according to the Bank of England, Morgan Stanley, get my sources correct, they're saying this is the biggest concern in their company. And the debt ceiling is totally different this time around than what we've ever faced before. We are facing the debt ceiling needs to be raised by the 29th of September. Otherwise, for the first time in history, we will have not just a government shutdown, but a government default. So it's very crucial that we do raise this. Unfortunately, Steve Mnuchin met recently with Chuck Schumer, and they couldn't, and Mitch McConnell behind closed doors to agree on some sort of thing they agree on together, commonality. And they couldn't find anything. And Mitch McConnell and Schumer, they just, had it out just kind of like the Congress does, and couldn't come to any conclusion. Long story short, this is why Steve Mnuchin, the Secretary of Treasury, announced that this has to happen. Unfortunately, it's not even on the calendar for the Congress. They're on summer hiatus till September first week, and there's only 12 days left for this to happen. But this time it's different than any previous time, and here's why. The deficit is now at $176 billion, the biggest gap in a monthly gap. That was March, the highest this has been. We're about $800 billion of a budget gap between where we were about 660 in budget gap in 2011. Normally, you don't pass a debt ceiling, raise a debt ceiling, and have a budget at the same time. The last time this happened was 2011. We had a Democrat president, a House and a Senate that was Democrat, and they all were working together. They passed both of these things within a day of each other, but we were in such an overspending at that time, and we were $14 trillion in that debt at that time. We got a credit downgrade for the second time in the history of our country. Gold and silver rallied, Steve, for 5 months, up about 40% in that duration of time. Then it slowed down and corrected. This time, though, we have fighting. And we have this happening. We're probably going to have a government shutdown, unfortunately.
Yeah. And the impacts of that on the market and what that would do if you're holding some precious metals in your portfolio. We'll talk about that and a few other things when we come back and finish up with David Fischer. This is Steve Noble. We'll be right back. Welcome back. This is Steve Noble. It is Called to Action Radio. Great to be back live in the studio. Day number 2, back from my 2-week sabbatical, which was awesome. And just reminded me of how much I need rest and how little rest I actually get. So that was a great blessing. My voice is doing better. It's still a little scratchy here and there, but it's way better than it was a couple weeks ago, and still trying to do a little investigation there to find if there's a couple other things we need to deal with, but it certainly is much better than it has been, and I praise God for that. And for those of you that knew about it and maybe were following some of the things that I put up on Facebook, plus I did mention it before on the air, and prayed for me, believe me, I felt those prayers. God really ministered to me over these last couple of weeks, spent a lot of time reading, not only in his word, but some other books that I needed to read and some authors I've got coming on in the future. So, and just to spend some time with my family and just really to kind of unplug. I have never done that for 2 weeks, not that I can recall as an adult. So it was just a great blessing, and really appreciate you guys and your patience, and had some great guest hosts and played some best of shows from the past. So thank you for sticking with me, and thanks for caring about me and for praying for me. One of the things I wasn't able to do for a couple of weeks is remind you of our friends at MediShare. Again, a great Christian ministry across America, not a regular insurance company by any stretch of the imagination, but they've been around since '93. Over $1 billion in healthcare expenses shared by Christians nationwide since then. And it's really a great way around Obamacare. Can save you $400, $500, $600 a month. It's been a great blessing for the Noble family. So I would encourage you strongly to check it out for yourself. 855-BIBLE-11 is their phone number. 855-BIBLE-11, also now available in Montana. So give them a call, 855-BIBLE-11. We're talking to our good friend David Fischer on a Monday on a Tuesday, but that's fine. We're still getting to this information, which is important. Jesus talked a lot about money. It's all over both the New and the Old Testament, and that's why I have no problem and feel obligated to talk about it here on the show. And David's been a great friend and ally and partner on that for a while now, over a year and a half. So that's been a great blessing. And David, we were talking before the break, and we're in the last segment here, about the debt ceiling, and you said that, well, this one's different. This crisis is different. It's a kind of a different animal in this case. Let's go back to your answer on that as to why, because I think it's important that we all understand that, and then we'll move on.
Because we don't have a unified Congress, and if they can't agree on something this magnitude, we'll have a government shutdown, and this time a default. So, and this has shown up, it's how in depth we're not unified, is something fairly simple, repealing and replacing Obamacare, that we could have had the plan in place a long time ago, and we all know that it's not working. So even the Democrats know that, and yet they couldn't come to an agreement on it. They just want to argue, and there have these factions. So this is why this time it's so different. They got to pass that and a budget. And they just want to. We have an arguing Congress, unfortunately.
Yeah, and the ineptitude, and I really don't even know how much they actually care about these issues that affect all of us radically. And you start looking at the net worth of people in Congress, especially in Senate, and they're just in another world. And that's why I trust them about as far as I can throw them, which isn't very far at all. And that's why we have to continue to talk about these things. Well, in terms of the government, and we've talked about this before, this whole notion of a bail-in. So what's a bail-in? Where has it occurred? And should we be worried about it here in the United States?
A bail-in is the opposite of a bailout. We bailed out Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, AIG, and General Motors. We came to their rescue, Steve, back in 2008, because otherwise they would have imploded and there would have been a financial havoc. So the government came to the rescue, and they paid back the government over time. A bail-in is nobody comes to the rescue, so therefore they have to go inward into their citizens' accounts, bank accounts, brokerage accounts, retirements, etc. It's happened in 9 countries in the last 5 years, and our country has picked up the blueprint, passed a lot of laws, and created a lot of agencies for it to happen. And in fact, the current Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis president, Neil Kashkari, says that U.S. taxpayers will be on the next bailout on the hook when the biggest banks hit the crisis. And he says there's a 70% chance this will happen. So that's the Fed saying that. And obviously we have Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac have $100 billion in crisis that they're going to need of new money. That just came out in Bloomberg News here a couple days ago. The EU just raised the deposit of holding of money on your account when you want to go withdraw your money. They now can hold your money for 20 days through new European banking laws. So there's something going on behind the scenes.
Yeah, that's awfully scary.
That this could be really scary. That's why you got to diversify into physical precious metals, roll over your 401k IRA, and take physical possession of your metals in your retirement.
And these bail-ins have occurred in other countries, have they not?
They've occurred in 9 countries. 8 of the 9 are European. The 9th one was Argentina.
Yeah, and that's literally, I mean, I remember the one, where was it? In Cyprus. I remember reading about that the first time, and I couldn't believe what I was reading, that literally overnight everybody wakes up in the morning, and if you had a certain amount of dollars, whatever their currency is, they took 10% of it. I mean, literally just came in overnight, and the next morning you go to the ATM, and you're like, wait a minute, I had $50,000 in my bank account last night. Now I have $45,000. Where did that $5,000 go? And literally the government just came in and took it. And you just go, is this a movie? No, this is reality, and we need to be prepared for it. So you mentioned taking physical possession of gold. So if you have holdings in gold, can you kind of get that out of the stream that the government literally can't get to it?
Yes, because all bail-ins, all 9 bail-ins that were done, and the ones that are set up for America, they've already tested this in our country, in the government internally. And I have 3 sightings of the report in the bail-in report how they did this. It's all done electronically. So if somebody has their money in physical gold and silver. It doesn't trade electronically because it's physical, so you have that insulation. You're immune from the bail-in.
Yeah, so let's talk about, before we run out of time, we got a few more minutes left, but I want to make sure everybody understands. We're talking to David Fischer from Landmark Capital. Their website is landmarkgold.com or 844-879-8882. Help us to make sure we understand the different resources that are available, David, when people call.
Well, they can call our company and get the report called The Coming Bail-In, which is in its 6th edition, which quotes a lot of information that we're talking about, all the working components that our country has set up, how it was done before, and people have a really understanding why it needs to be done. They also have a white paper on how you can roll over your 401k and IRA and take physical possession, and even the IRS comments on that. We have other reports that there's different kinds of gold products and silver products out there, categories in silver and gold, and it goes over that. So, and it also explains the need and how gold is moving up and why, and it's not just the bail-in, it's inflation, it's currency devaluation. So here we are in a bull year in gold, bull year in stocks. Gold gives you the insurance plan that stocks can't.
Well, one of the big things right on the homepage at landmarkgold.com is the financial blueprint. So explain that to us again real quick, please.
Well, it's an interactive conversation that we have with every investor so that they can understand all the categories, the different markets in precious metals, gold and silver, what they do, what they don't do, their benefits and drawbacks. I do this all the time. One of the most recent one, the investor sent us a check and invested outside of retirement. And they listened to your program, and here's the note that they included in their check. Thanks for taking the time, David, thanks for taking the time with me. I haven't had anyone break down in terms of where I understand like you have done, and also thanks for your heart for the Lord. Wow. Tim. So we're here to help people. That's what this is all about. Help them be a good steward of the funds the Lord has entrusted with them. Amen. Portion to 8, portion to 7, because you do not know what tragedy may befall you.
Yeah, that's right. So let me ask you this question. This is more of a personal question, David. But obviously not all the clients of Landmark Capital are Christians. But when you have an opportunity to interact with a fellow believer in that business environment, and you're helping them with education, information, and whether they become a purchasing client or not, what's that like for you to be able to kind of talk to people on the phone that maybe heard you on the radio, or just to connect with another believer in a business environment?
Well, it's just an incredible feeling. This is what I love doing more than anything, more than running my company, is having an interactive conversation. Another quick story, just last week, I believe he was a non-believer, and he's going through some major health issues. And so he hadn't invested with our company. He was just thinking about it. But he came probably to the conclusion he's going to need to hold off on his money because he's had some major, major health issues. I said to him, "Can I pray for you?" He says, "What?" I said, "Can I pray for you?" He says, "Well, yeah, that'd be great. Thanks. Think of me in your prayer when you get time." I said, "No, can I pray for you now?" Yeah, and it just shocked him. So I prayed for him, and I ended the prayer, and obviously in Jesus' name, amen. And I think I'm going to have a chance to share the gospel with this man in the near future, and that's what it's really all about. Yeah,
that is what it's all about, and it's amazing how often you ask people if you can pray for them. The reaction is almost entirely positive. Occasionally, I've run into people that, will give you a little grief, but that's so rare. Even at places like a restaurant, if you stop and just with your server, the next time you're at a restaurant, go, "Hey, we're going to be praying over our meal here and thanking God for our meal here in a minute. Is there anything we can pray about for you?" And you'll see the shock on most people's faces because they're not used to you caring about them. But when you ask somebody, "Can I pray for you?" they know that means you actually care. And it's an awesome experience in watching people respond to that, and the privilege of praying for people because we have access to the throne as followers of Christ. Man, that's a huge blessing.
I teach my guys in my company, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Well, we certainly know that about you, David Fischer, and that's why I love you as my brother in Christ and appreciate every time you're on the show. Thanks again so much. It's so helpful.
God bless you, God bless your listeners, and God bless America.
Amen. Thank you, buddy. We'll talk to you again real soon. That's David Fischer, Landmark Capital, landmarkgold.com, or 844-879-8882. If I wanted to get rich, I wouldn't be doing Christian radio. So please understand me that when I have people like David on and we're talking, it's not because I'm hawking a bunch of stuff and making a bunch of money. It's just a worthwhile conversation. It's helpful information. And like I said at the beginning of the show, and I'll say it again here at the end, Jesus talked a lot about money. Money and possessions is all over the Scripture. That's why I make sure to include it in what we talk about here on Called to Action Radio. Tomorrow, a great testimony, a great Bible teacher, friend of mine, Russ Andrews, here in Raleigh, North Carolina. He'll be with me for the full hour tomorrow. That's going to be a great show. I look forward to talking to you, God willing, then.